The most important thing that I'd like you to keep in mind is that the earliest travelers and explorers who came to India, they came by land from Europe. At that time, Europe, say the 15th century, the 14th century, were already nations who had started mapping their own countries. The people who came overland, remember, had a very hard time because they were crossing deserts in the Middle East through Arabia and say Turkey, Arabia, what is Iraq, Iran, all that area, and coming into India from the west. They mainly came in through the Bolan Pass. But of course, many more Central Asian tribes and all came in through the other passes in the northern part, the Khyber and other more difficult routes. So when they went back, the people who went back were really the true adventurers and explorers. And many of them wrote their memoirs with very exaggerated versions of what they saw and what they heard. Now, the cartographer who's making the map did not visit India. And he did not have any survey sources like we have today. So he was dependent on these stories, and the maps that were made at that time incorporated all this information that he gathered from these memoirs. Now, once Vasco da Gama and the Portuguese specifically after that have an established sea route to India, you are no longer dependent then on the writings of the explorers who had come by land. These are people who are coming by sailing boats, sailing ships, not boats, sailing boats. So they are dependent on the winds, not only to transfer their goods, but also for the lives of the people, to know how to get to the place where they can source their products best. And what are these products? Initially, of great interest was textiles, opium, indigo, jewels, slaves, coir, as I mentioned. Sometimes we forget how important even things like coir and rice was, or salt was, because these are not so exciting as, say, jewels to write about, or to write about opium and things like that. But they are important, and you can see them when you examine the maps of the period, then you know how important it all is. Now, so this happens to be a very, very productive time for making good maps. Now, one of the important things that happened here was this was the period of what you call the portolan maps in Europe. Portolan maps are really made specially for mariners, so that they can move from port to port and they avoid dangers. And they're not really interested in long distances. They are interested in navigating close to the coast from one place to the other. So this was the period of the portolan maps, and I'll show you through an example what it looked like. The other thing that happened is this became a period where information on seasons were gathered, specifically because India is a monsoon country, and we have winds blowing one way for a certain set of months and the winds blowing the opposite way for the other set of months. So because these were sailing ships and steamships had not been introduced, and they were so dependent on the winds, and the winds affected the currents, and the currents affected the fishing. So it was very important to know for how long the wind blew from where to where. The other thing that was very important to know also was where the factories were placed. Factories were really warehouses where they gathered products from the hinterland. So there was no point in having a factory where the hinterland couldn't be used to source products that had to be traded in, whether you're trading along the coast or you're taking it back to Europe or some other country. Okay, because over the years we see that many different kinds of trading was taking place. It was not all for taking things back to Europe. For example, The Portuguese, within a very short time, after establishing themselves in, say, Calicut and Goa and Daman and do all that, were actually charging protection money from other ships that wanted to go to Surat. So the Gulf of Cambay area was very well charted. They also went very quickly to Chittagong, which is far away. And Bengal was considered a very rich source of products for trade, and therefore the European companies, they call themselves East India companies, the trading companies. So whether it was the Dutch or whether it was the Ostend, which was very short-lived, about 125 years or something, or the Portuguese or French, they all established factories in the Hooghly Delta. Now, this is the bit about the coastal areas and all the factories, as I will show you on the maps, and I'm sure you've read in history, were established along the Malabar, Konkan, and Coromandel and Orissa coasts, the Kalinga coast, and Bengal, of course. There's a major change that happens after this, and this is the period that broadly is the Mughal period. But the inland areas, as I mentioned in the video, were not very well mapped because people were interested in the coast. They were coming by ship and going back by ship. They didn't have much interest in further inland. The British became more dominant. The 1757 Battle of Plassey took place. Things slowly started changing. In 1764, to my mind, that is the really critical year, not even 1757. 1764 was the Battle of Buxar. After the Battle of Buxar, the British East India Company got the Diwani of Bengal and part of Bihar. What that meant is, from being just traders, they became tax collectors, which is why they were so interested in negotiating for the Diwani. Collecting tax means you need to know about the agricultural lands, you need to know about the forests, you need to know about the mines. You basically need to know everything about your land. Otherwise, how will you know whether you're taxing correctly or not?